Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners, and today's video is going to be a straight banger. Sing it to me, Swag Rich. Beautiful vocals there, but that is right. Today's video is going to be an in-depth, in-your-face masterpiece talking about why, if you follow certain rankings, your season is already screwed. Because some of the expert consensus rankings out there right now, in my opinion, are garbage. There's a few players that we're higher on and a few players that we're lower on. And I've got two guys that I am just going to absolutely blow your mind on with some great information. And I've got four more guys that we're going to do a little bit of let it flow, rapid fire through them to let you know why I also don't agree with those expert consensus rankings. So at the end of the day, are these guys going to be must-haves, must-avoids? I know one thing that is a must. It's heading over to manscaped.com. Code word headliners at checkout. 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Don't miss out on any of it. You are going to want to do that if you still need to get yourself cleaned up for the rest of the summer. But ladies and gentlemen, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners. You're not going to want to miss any of this information because the first ECR I disagree with is Deebo Samuel. Why do I disagree with Deebo Samuel? Well, here's the thing. Right now, for the San Francisco 49ers, his ECR is sitting at 24 overall, the wide receiver 10 off the board. Now, there is one thing I consistently hear with Deebo this year, and it's that, oh, I don't want to invest in him because they're not going to use him like they did last year. Wrong. That's not accurate at all. Because they are going to use him like they did last year, because that's how they used him the year before. The only big difference last year is the amount of rushing touchdowns that he got. So if you want to tell me that you're out on him because you don't think he can replicate his rushing touchdowns, that is one argument. But to say he's not going to be used the same way this year is completely false, because it's how they've used him every year, and it's not how you think. So our ranking right now we've got him at 19 overall, the wide receiver 10 off the board. Now, I've got screenshots. For those of you out there that love receipts, I've got some receipts right here for you. I've got screenshots from a video I did last year where I talked about Deebo Samuel as a 2021 bounce back or bust. And I listed him as a bounce back, and I told you all why. And I also told you that you needed to invest in him last year. And oh, by the way, reading through the comments on that video were pretty funny because there was a lot of people that were adamant that I was an idiot. Really fun to read through. Anyway, who's the idiot now? Screenshot number one, targets behind the line of scrimmage. Back in 2020, these are the rankings for Deebo Samuel when he was targeted behind the line of scrimmage. 21 targets, 21 receptions, 229 receiving yards. He had 7 missed tackles forced and 11 first downs. So on those statistics right there, on targets that went behind the line of scrimmage, third, first, second, and first. Basically, as a wide receiver, he was utilized behind the line of scrimmage in several different ways, all right? And there's nothing wrong with that on those targets. Those are not rushing attempts. The situation that you all are worried about this year are the rushing attempts. These things right here were true 2 years ago, and they were true last year. This is how Deebo Samuel is going to continue to be utilized. In fact, a couple of years ago, if you take a look at it, his targets behind the line of scrimmage, he had 10.9 yards per reception, which was fourth, 315 yards after the catch, which was first, 15 yards after the catch per reception, which was third, and he averaged 10.90 per yards per route run, which was fifth. All of this to get to the last fact that his negative 4.1 average depth of target was the 5th lowest for wide receivers that were targeted behind the line of scrimmage. This is a guy that those little swing passes, those screens behind the lines, things of that nature, those things are not going to disappear, and he excels at those. So why would they stop him, and why would Brandon Ayuk hurt him in any capacity whatsoever? He won't. He won't. And you've got to believe that even though they are going to be moving to Trey Lance, they are still going to utilize this same type of playmaking ability with Deebo Samuel. Because my main comparison for Trey Lance coming out of college was Patrick Mahomes, and I haven't moved off of that at all. He's got the arm, he's got the cannon, he's got the football IQ. You're going to see it this season. Kyle Shanahan the other day basically saying, yep, Lance is our guy. Tyreek Hill was used kind of in the same way in Kansas City, and Patrick Mahomes seemed to do just fine. So just because you've got a big arm, strong arm quarterback doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going to be able to use Deebo Samuel the same way they have in the past. I mentioned those screenplays 2 years ago, same thing. First in on screenplays, first in receiving yards, first after the catch, 15.4 yards after the catch per reception, which was 6. Yards per route run was first, 7 missed tackles forced was also first. So, ladies and gentlemen, Deebo Samuel utilized in that capacity, there is nothing wrong with that. And that is how he's still going to be utilized, because that is the type of wide receiver that Deebo Samuel is. So will the rushing attempts go down this year? Yeah, probably. Will the rushing touchdowns go down this year? Yeah, possibly. But we also know that Deebo is an insane playmaker. His 2021 ranks, if you're wondering how he does in 2021, a lot of it was the same thing. He had 10.18 yards after the catch per reception, first. He had 18.25 yards per reception, third. 12.32 yards per target, that was third. And these were not on plays that were behind the line of scrimmage. This is just overall on any passing attempt. Deebo Samuel was utilized last year even more like a normal wide receiver than he had been in the past. But the thing is that he also added all of these rushing touchdowns. Deebo Samuel's a beast. He wins all over the field. He knocks people over. He gains yards after the catch. He's a guy that gets that second chance for you. And by the way, his average depth of target last year was an 8.55. So don't you think that having a strong-armed quarterback would potentially even just help accelerate his game a little bit? Because now you're still going to have everything added in on the back end. He's still going to be utilized a lot of the same way that he was before. With those screens, with those passes behind the line of scrimmage, those routes over the middle while Ayuk and Kittle are drawing defenders down the seams. This is a guy that can win all over the field, and he is going to be utilized the same way. Why? Because one of the best head coaches, one of the best offensive minds in football, Kyle Shanahan, draws up game plans for him. This guy knows what he can do to put guys in the best situation to win. Yes, we don't like how he treated Brandon Ayuk last year. Yes, we hate that he does this running back by committee. But the one thing he does is he puts superstars in places to win, and there's no argument against the fact that Deebo is one of those guys. So if you want to argue with me that he's not going to be utilized the same way that he was last year, you're wrong. If you want to argue with me that he's not going to replicate the rushing statistics that he had last year, yes, then you are absolutely right. So ladies and gentlemen of Headliner Nation, it's very important that you separate those two things and understand what you may or may not be arguing. So we're higher on Deebo Samuel than the consensus. What about a guy that we're lower on? Some of you might hate this, especially if you're an Eagles fan. Listen, whenever you talk bad about an Eagles player, Eagles fans are typically very, very, very quick to say how stupid you are, all right? We know how those Philly fans are. I've met some really good Philly fans, but they're very passionate about their teams. That's one thing, right? So if anybody in the comments is calling me a hater or an idiot, you know that they're an Eagles fan right away, okay? Here we go. Expert consensus ranking right now has A.J. Brown as the 28th overall player, wide receiver 12. And we're not on that bandwagon because we've got him at 37 overall and wide receiver 17. We like A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is a supremely good talent, an excellent talent. He is a guy that really was just overlooked, overshadowed, and not talked about nearly enough coming out of the draft, because he didn't have great college production, because his quarterback sucked in college. So it wasn't his fault. And he's been a beast since he's entered the league. Yes, he's had some problems staying healthy. So we have to keep that in mind as we go through this analysis. But it's not that I don't like A.J. Brown. It's that I don't love the Eagles offense for the way it fits A.J. Brown. Okay, so take a look at the 2021 Philadelphia Eagles. They were last in the league in passing attempts with 494 passing attempts. They were 31st in the league, completing 307 of those. 25th in the league with a 62.1% completion percentage. They were 29th in passing yards with 3,585, and they were 28th in the league in passing touchdowns with 20. Now, I brought up all of the stats, all of them, because Jalen Hurts missed 2 games. So I didn't want anyone to be like, well, Kyle, he missed 2 games. It didn't matter. This team as a whole last year was not a big passing upside team. They ran the football with Jalen Hurts, Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, whoever else was healthy enough to grab a ball and run away with it. They were all over the place. They were not a very pick up and go type of offense. They weren't quick. They're not trying to run as many plays as possible. Could that change? Potentially. But even Jalen Hurts on his own last year completed 265 of his 432 attempts. So his completion rate was barely 61% last year. And if you want to say, well, Kyle, he had some wide receivers with the dropsies. Okay, he had a 73.7% adjusted completion rate. You know what that means? That means that they adjusted his completion rate to take a look at how many drops that were had by wide receivers, and that was still 24th in the league. So did his wide receivers hurt him a little bit? Yeah, but not that much because he still wasn't even a top 20 quarterback based on adjusted completion rate. One thing he did do decent last year, he threw the ball down the field a little bit, but he was bad at it. 75 deep targets, which were 9th in the league. He only completed 26 of those, which were 13th. His 34.7% deep completion rate was 24th among qualifying quarterbacks. So yeah, they tried to go deep down the field, but Jalen Hurts wasn't finding his guy. Now, let's be devil's advocate here and jump to the other side, because that's one thing we pride ourselves on, is being able to say, hey, we see something one way or another. So let's say that, yes, now you've got a guy that can win down the field. So that's actually going to help Jalen Hurts. But here's the thing. It's not like he's just not accurate down the field. He's not accurate anywhere. He is not a complete quarterback. In fantasy, if you want to draft him because he has rushing upside, I get you. But even Devontae Smith last year didn't have that great of a season. I mean, it was good, and he was the only target. But do we think that all of a sudden Jalen Hurts is going to be a guy that takes a huge step forward? Could he? Yeah, absolutely. But if you're looking for that type of a step forward, then you're basically telling me that you think Jalen Hurts is as good as Josh Allen. Do you really think that? Do we really think that Jalen Hurts has all the tools to be a Josh Allen-like quarterback? If you're saying that, I'm going to need you to put the drink down, okay? Because I'm recording this like early morning. You've been drinking way too early. I need you to step away from it. But if you're not saying that, then we have to look at this realistically and say, okay, we might really like A.J. Brown, but we're basically just saying, oh, it's because he's going to get all the targets in the world. Is he? Is he? There's a good chance that A.J. Brown is going to have to be uber efficient next year. Taking a look at the 2021 targets for Eagles wide receivers or players in general, Devontae Smith led the way with 104. Running backs had 100. So I combined all the running backs. Running backs had 100 targets last season. Dallas Goedert, if you're being fancy, had 76. Quez Watkins had 62, Jalen Reagor with 57, Zach Ertz with 31, and then we had some miscellaneous targets. We had those just kind of sprinkled all over the place. But these were the leaders, all right? And we know that we got rid of Zach Ertz. We know that happened, okay? So let's just be realistic and think, all right, if we were to predict 2022 targets, what would they look like? Well, Devontae Smith, let's just say for craps and giggles, because I can't cuss, Devontae Smith, let's say he gets 100 targets, flat. We take away 4. Let's say the running backs stay right around 100 targets, because honestly, when you look at it, that's not that crazy to think about. That's what they got last year. Wouldn't be surprised if they get it again this year. Dallas Goedert, we're going to bump up to 100 targets. From the 76 he got last year, we know Zach Ertz is gone. We know Zach Ertz took a lot of those to begin the season. Dallas Goedert is a guy that plays as a tight end over 90% of the snaps almost every single week. 100 targets is more than realistic for Dallas Goedert. And then we're going to throw in the wide receiver 3 with 80 targets, because there's going to be some guy or group of guys and again, probably Watkins and Reagor, that might get like 40-ish targets each, all right? Jalen Reagor, that would be a drop of 17 targets. With Quez Watkins, you're talking about 22 targets there. So you're looking at a couple of guys that, if they are kind of smashed together to be that wide receiver 3 on the team, you're talking about even a drop in targets for each of those guys for next year, combining to be about 80 overall. And then again, there's just some miscellaneous targets that just can go to anybody. So I set that number at 30 because it was like 45 last year, so I even took 15 away from that. So honestly, I'm taking targets away from people, or I'm leaving them exactly the same as last year. So if you do that, then you're talking about 410 total targets. And I talked about it a couple of minutes ago. The Philadelphia Eagles last year, they didn't complete. They didn't have very many passing attempts. They only passed the ball 494 times last season. So even if I'm saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to give them an extra 6 passing attempts, do we really think the Eagles are going to push over 500 passing attempts next year? Because if they don't, we're talking about maybe 90 targets total for A.J. Brown. So a few things are going to have to happen here. Either the wide receiver 3 is going to become completely unrealistic and is going to get no targets whatsoever. So Reagor, Watkins, all those guys, boom, gone, out the door. We're not seeing them with any targets whatsoever. Or Dallas Goedert isn't going to get nearly 100. Listen, he's already got that chemistry with Jalen Hurts. He was uber efficient, one of the most efficient tight ends. And in fact, based on our data here that we put together, the most efficient tight end, almost, outside of Mark Andrews, last season. He's amazing. So is he really going to get less than 100 targets? Maybe the running backs do get less than 100 targets. But then what we're talking about is, okay, there's absolutely no room for growth for Devontae Smith either. Do we really think Devontae Smith doesn't have any room to grow? So again, it's not that we don't like A.J. Brown. It's not that we don't like, it's not that we don't like Jalen Hurts. It's just, we have to look at this realistically and say to ourselves, either this team becomes a pass-heavy team, or Jalen Hurts takes a huge step forward, or someone completely disappears from this offense. And then even then, how many extra targets does that realistically get A.J. Brown? Because if you're sitting at about 90 targets for A.J. Brown, they're the highest wide receiver last year in fantasy football ranks to have less than 100 targets was Amari Cooper as the wide receiver 26. He had 99 targets last year. He was the highest fantasy football wide receiver last season to be under 100 targets, and he came in at wide receiver 26 in a full PPR. So again, A.J. Brown, for him to get higher, even to be a top 12 wide receiver, we're talking about 130 targets probably. We're talking about 130 targets to get him into that wide receiver 1 range, which means out of the numbers that I put here, we got to find him 40 extra targets. So you could say, yeah, well, we'll just take the miscellaneous targets away. You could, but it's going to happen. Every team every year has guys that they get random targets out of nowhere. It's going to happen. You could say we could take targets away from Quez Watkins and Jalen Ray, but one of these guys, if not both of them, are going to be the wide receiver 3. You don't think Jalen Hurts is going to find them every once in a while as well? I mean, do you think if Dallas Goedert's getting less than 100 targets, then you can't really talk to me about him being a top 6 tight end, which he is for most people. Running backs, I mean, this is a team that's Jalen Hurts is going to dump off. Devontae Smith, we're basically taking targets away from him. So then you would also have to say that there would need to be room for growth. If there's no room for growth for Devontae Smith, then you can't like him. We've got to knock him down even further as well. This is an issue. A lot of things are going to have to go right for A.J. Brown to hit above that wide receiver 12 status, and I just don't think it can happen. I'm being very, very, very cautious with it because I think all the numbers I played out here for you are realistic. Let's talk about the best of the rest. And again, we're going to spitfire through a few guys here that I either agree or disagree with and why, and break down some statistics for you. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about these guys right now. Gabe Davis, he's right now wide receiver 29, overall 71. We've got him overall at 58, wide receiver 24. There's 184 vacated targets out in Buffalo this year. And people are talking about Crowder, OJ Howard, things like that. I understand that. But Gabe Davis had 63 targets on his own in 2021. So if you were to say, like, let's say Jamison Crowder comes in and gets 70 to 90 of those 184 vacated targets, Davis can still easily hit 100 targets. Which for us, if he does, and you kind of add in that big play ability and that ability to score touchdowns, wide receiver 24, if he gets 100 to 110 targets, is probably being a little bit on the low side. Because if this is a guy that can also score like close to double-digit touchdowns, we're talking about a guy that should easily be a wide receiver too. For Allen Lazard, right now, he's sitting at 106 overall, wide receiver 44. We have got him at 92 overall, wide receiver 37. There's 224 vacated targets coming from the Green Bay Packers. Now, Aaron Jones likely will be able to see a little bit of a step up in his targets. All right. But Allen Lazard already had 60 targets in 2021. So even if we say, hey, you know, these guys, Watkins is going to come in and he's going to have what do you want to say, 80 targets ish, somewhere in there. Robert Tonyan comes back healthy and he has some, or I said Christian Watson, excuse me. You know, let's say Robert Tonyan comes back and he gets himself 60 to 70 targets. You know, Allen Lazard is a guy that already having 60 targets in 2021, again, taking those 224, if we just give 40 of those to Allen Lazard, we're going to be putting this guy above 100 targets. We're going to be putting this guy around 100 targets. He already scored 8 touchdowns in 2021. He could become one of the main goal line wide receiver weapons for this team, utilized kind of the same way that Davante Adams was. Now, Adams was superior in his route running ability, so I'm not looking towards that with Allen Lazard right now. But I do like Lazard in the terms of, you know, being able to win kind of some fade passes, jump passes, things like that. And keep in mind with Davante Adams as well, for those of you that love Christian Watson, Davante Adams himself, like, he didn't even start to really be a generous fantasy contributor until year 3. Because, listen, Adams didn't have his first 1,000-yard season until his 5th year in the league. He didn't have 100 targets until his 3rd year in the league. We know Aaron Rodgers doesn't love rookies. He loves to commit to guys that he's been with. He's been talking up Allen Lazard during training camp. If Lazard stays healthy, this is a guy that could easily be a wide receiver 3. And if you talk about the guy goes over 100 targets, maybe even a little bit higher. Allen Robinson, people don't even talk about him enough anymore. They're so upset from last season. He's 58 overall for them, wide receiver 24. For us, we've got him at 47, wide receiver 20. OBJ, when OBJ came to town last year in the middle of the season, from weeks 12 through 18, he was the wide receiver 21 overall. Wide receiver 21 overall, scored 5 touchdowns in 7 games. And in the playoffs, he averaged 6.5 targets per game, caught just over 5 of those for 57 yards per game, and he scored 2 touchdowns in the playoffs. So here's a couple of things for Allen Robinson. Number 1, running backs are not going to be a huge factor. Why? Because Cam Akers, Darrell Henderson, they're not really quote-unquote pass-catching backs. For Cam Akers, they're probably not going to want him to get beat around too much to begin the year. So that right there means that that's less competition for targets. Tyler Higbee, okay, but he's not a guy, quote-unquote. He's not a guy for Matthew Stafford. He's going to do some things here and there, but he's not going to be great. Allen Robinson's going to be able to fully lock in. Even if Cooper Kupp does his thing again, Allen Robinson is a guy that we can realistically lock in for over 100 targets. And because that there's going to be so much focus on Cooper Kupp, Allen Robinson really can be a guy that maybe efficiency isn't great, but volume-wise can go over 1,000 yards and get close to 10 receiving touchdowns. Give me that. As late as he's going, heck yeah. Knock that in for me every single time. And then Hunter Renfrow, we love us some Hunter Renfrow. Absolutely. We were probably one of the higher people on him last year. We pushed him early in the season. Hunter Renfrow, 93 overall for them. Wide receiver 36. We're a little bit lower at 98 and wide receiver 40. There's going to be 184 vacated targets in Las Vegas. And he had 128 targets in 2021. My problem is that with Davante Adams coming in, is he going to take away some of those 9 touchdowns that Hunter Renfrow had last year? Because the connection with Carr and Adams is already there. College players, college teammates, it's already there. So it's not like we're going to have to wait for them to build that. And we know that Devontae Adams, I mentioned it a minute ago with Allen Lazard, his route running ability on the goal line is second to none in the league. The dude just makes people just fall over at the goal line. He's so quick out of his breaks. He's so agile. It's really hard. So he's going to be a big winner at the goal line, where Hunter Renfrow last year was big. So he could take some of those 9 touchdowns. Another thing to point out too, Darren Waller last season, he had 93 targets. The dude missed 6 games and still had 93 targets last season. That is 8.45 targets per game. So if you average around 8 targets per game for Darren Waller, that's 143 targets on the season. So if you think that he's going to get 140 targets and Hunter Renfrow is going to get 120, and we're going to look at like 120, 130, 140 for Devontae Adams, we're getting a little crazy with the numbers there. So for me, Hunter Renfrow, I think he just comes back to being a guy that's more of just like a safe kind of wide receiver 3 flex play maybe in certain weeks. That in good matchups, he's going to have some upside. In those matchups where they're going to be throwing the ball, he's going to have some really good upside. Those are the things that I'm looking at right now with him to say, hey, I love Hunter Renfrow, but adding Devontae Adams just isn't going to help his cause this season. But ladies and gentlemen, my voice is already going out. Listen, we tried to bang through that as quickly as possible. I wanted to keep the video on the short. I didn't want to go like 30, 40, 50 minutes into this video. And right now we're like, what? At about 26. So we got to hurry it up and close this thing out. But ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you all tuning into this video. I need you to hit that like button for me. Come on, baby. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you are new here, you're not going to want to miss any of our content the rest of the season. And leave me a comment down below and let me know, of all the players I listed here, who do you agree with the most, or who do you disagree with the most? Let me know down in the comments below. I appreciate everybody that had a chance to check out this video. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'm going to go get a drink of water. I'll see you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.
Analytics off the chain, all the channels not the same. Jake and Kyle, you know the name. Headliner Nation, we running the game. Y'all stuck on third down. Your content's plain Jane. Headliners on top now. We gonna move and change. Podcast off the rip. Draft guide, so legit. Fantasy world, our game tight. You know we about that chub life. Stuck in a rut and you need some motivation. Head to the channel for this Headliner Nation. I'm a headliner.